Hey everybody, Jason Blaha here. Alright, today I'd like to talk to you about the topic of barbells versus dumbbells and their uses and benefits of each and how they compare to each other for different goals. Hold on, let me give you guys a couple poses first. Getting leaner, getting ready for, again, my photos for the end of the bodybuilding.com Nutrition Misc Transformation Challenge. So again, I'm trying to dry out a bit and drop a little bit of water weight so I can come in tighter. And it seems to be working. All right, but that aside, let's go back to the topic of barbells versus dumbbells. I've caught quite a bit of criticism on forums and in other circles sometimes that have been called a barbell Nazi sometimes because I do tend to generally promote the use of barbell work over dumbbell work for overall hypertrophy. So I want to get into that in a little more detail. Now I'm going to skip on dumbbell work for lower body because quite frankly it's fucking asinine. I mean, using dumbbells for any lower body movement, it just insanely limits the amount of weight you can use, whether it's a squat or a deadlift. I mean, um, again, so I don't even want to touch on that because even with something like a stiff leg deadlift, most people's gyms only have maybe 120, 130-pound dumbbells. I mean, if you can't do like 50 reps with that, on a stiff leg deadlift, in each hand, you probably shouldn't even be doing dumbbell work. You need to be, on some basic routine, just some basic barbell routine, because you're too fucking weak to even mess with stuff like that. So I'm not going to really get into, again, for lower body, but I do want to discuss this for upper body. And again, while I've been oftentimes accused of being a barbell Nazi, I don't believe that barbells are the only way to do things or you're even optimal for all things. I think that the dumbbells, cables, and even to some extent machines, do have their use. They do have their use in bodybuilding, powerlifting, athletic performance. They do have their place. However, one of the big reasons that I tend to generally promote barbell work is that it oftentimes leads to better overall development than other movements. And again, particularly your big, heavy barbell movements. And it's not always about developing each muscle to its fullest. Because, I mean, an argument, from a single lift, um, again, because it's often argued that there are EMG studies showing that, dumbbells can recruit more fibers in the chest than barbells do in EMG studies and things. And I mean, those are important things to consider, and it does give you an idea of what the role of the dumbbells should be. But generally speaking, if you're not weak point training and you're not trying to correct muscle imbalances or bring up lagging points and you're just seeking overall development, which again, the majority of people who are training, and training hard, trying to gain muscle, they're generally, just trying to gain as much overall muscle and keep a fairly balanced physique as quickly as they can, with the fewest amount of hours in the gym. And the best way to do that is again just through barbell work, because generally speaking, let's compare, a barbell bench press with a dumbbell as a general rule. Because you're having to stabilize it a bit less, you're going to be able to use a heavier load. You're going to be able to induce more workload. And you're going to be able to work with those heavier weights down in the low reps easier. I mean, again, trying to do something like a 5x5 with dumbbells because of the stabilization can be really awkward. So you're forced to use a little higher reps. But when you're wanting to do really, really heavy work, the barbell will let you get more total overload. And it's, again, it's not always about optimizing gains in the specific primary mover versus just overall development, because it's cumulative, it adds up. And and again, you take something like a barbell bench press, and again, it can be argued that again the dumbbells get a deeper stretch at the bottom, and that is a benefit. But I think part of that is that they can be a good training tool to teach you how to bench correctly, because a lot of guys who cannot build their chest bench pressing, it's generally because they don't know how to bench. They don't know how to get their scapula back. They don't know how to get the stretch at the bottom. And accordingly, the bench press ends up becoming just basically a delt and tricep movement for them. But, again, if they can learn to do it correctly, get correct mind-muscle connection, they're going to be able to get a heavier overload with dumbbells. And in addition to, a good pec builder, it is helping build their delts and triceps and things more because it's just a general overload. And, again, when you start to get to a point where you get muscle imbalances, again, if your pecs are lagging, that's where it becomes really useful to start incorporating dumbbells. Or if you start getting unilateral imbalances, it's the same. And again, when you look at things like rowing, this issue is even more pronounced because, again, it's about overall hypertrophy. Because you generally have to go, you go a lot heavier on a barbell row, you're going to be forced to, at some point, if you're going heavy enough, to use leg drive, use a bit of English. And, ultimately that transfers into better overall development, core development, posterior chain development. And so again, this carries over into overall hypertrophy. So I mean, again, the same argument can be made that for general hypertrophy, barbell rowing is superior to dumbbell rowing. Again, unless you're starting to get a lat imbalance, and your other muscles are growing disproportionate to it, then that's at what point you would want to start adding in the dumbbell rows. And also the same can be said of the delts, because again, there are EMG studies showing that the dumbbell press does hit the delts a little better than a barbell press off the chest, overhead. And again, the counter argument is, of course, so again, the barbell allows more versatility for this because it does allow more range of motion than dumbbells, and without putting that extra strain on the rotators and trying to stabilize heavy dumbbells for a full range of motion. So generally, what you see is when going heavy, most people who are using dumbbells, they do partial reps. And it's because it is difficult to stabilize full range of motion reps on that, particularly without injury. So again, I mean, but when you go to the behind the neck, it actually beats the dumbbells in EMG studies when you start pressing behind the neck. So, again, I mean, we see a good example of how the barbell can be superior there. And on top of that, it allows more versatility. It allows you to do standing work. It allows you to do push presses, far more easily. Things where you can get a really, really heavy overload by using leg drive and support muscles to get a more explosive concentric rep, and then get a heavier load on the concentric or in the eccentric rep, lowering it because you have to lower an eccentric rep fairly controlled. Again, for hypertrophy purposes, or even sometimes general injury prevention. And by getting a heavier eccentric rep, you are getting just as much tension, if and probably more tension than on the primary movers, but you're using other muscles and using your full body to help with the concentric rep, and again, it induces more overall hypertrophy. So again, I mean, that's kind of the basics of it. And I would say that, again, for most people, they're not competitive bodybuilders. They're not trying to prep for a bodybuilding show where each individual muscle requires the huge amount of time and care being put into it. And most people don't have enough free time to even train in that way. Most people just trying to gain, build a decently impressive physique as quickly as possible, don't have time to do, 4 hours, 5 days a week in the gym. They don't have 20 hours to lift with, to work in and get every single, plane and angle built up correctly through using various isolation movements. And again, when you start looking at the professional bodybuilders, they can get away with this, but again, as I've covered in the other videos on training frequencies, they require a much lower training frequency than a natural or a casual steroid user does. I mean, because again, naturals, if they're not hitting a muscle, again, almost every 48 hours, it tends to, have downtime in the week to where it's not growing at all. And so they need higher frequency, and it doesn't allow them a lot of wiggle room always if you're seeking optimal growth for all of these various, isolation movements and even dumbbell movements sometimes. And again, that's why for them, you would generally only add these when you're trying to address a weak point or an imbalance. So, and again, when you're dealing with professional bodybuilders, they're oftentimes on huge amounts of steroids, growth hormone, insulin, IGF-1, prostaglandins, some of the newer, anabolic peptides that are out that that are, again, fairly new to the scene. And so there are all of these drugs, and what you find is that they can grow for a week. So if they only have to train a muscle once a week, they're going to go ahead and go in and hit it with the most efficient angles possible, and just brutalize that muscle group and leave it alone for a week, because they're capable of growing for 6, 7, 8 days straight off of a single session due to all the anabolic hormones in their body. So, and again, that's not necessarily going to work as well for somebody who's natural, or someone who, whose steroid cycles look like they did in the Arnold days, to where they're just using such conservative amounts compared to what, modern professional bodybuilders use. They're not going to get the same results off of training in that style. So again, that's something that has to be considered. Now, what I will say for the dumbbells, there is one muscle group that I would say definitely dumbbells are superior for, and that's going to be the biceps. And the reason for that being because of the function of the bicep and the way that it's generally limited in range of motion with barbell work, is that, or even with weighted chin-ups and things, is that you can get a much deeper stretch on things like incline curls, than you'd be able to do with a barbell, and engage in myostatic reflex, as well as allowing freedom to pronate and supinate the wrists, on curling. So dumbbells in that case, even for just general hypertrophy, I do think can be vastly superior for the biceps. But again, for other muscles, I really would say for most people who have limited training time, and they're just seeking overall growth, and they haven't developed muscle imbalances yet, again, the barbell is generally going to be superior for those purposes. Now, and again, for the novice trainee, I mean, if you have 14-inch arms and you only squat 315 for a couple reps, I mean, your whole body is a weakness. And so for you, unless something is just blaringly a weakness, there's no need to be doing weak point training when you're still in that phase of training, or very, very little weak point training, because again, your whole body is a weakness, and at that point, you need to focus on just overall development. And again, leave the weak point training to those who've built a bit of a foundation. And if you do it that way, you're going to get to your goals a lot faster. Okay, that's really all I have to say on that topic today. And this has been kind of a long video. I'll give you guys a bicep shot. And I'll talk to you next time.